Let's talk about USIP. The Trump administration is gutting the institution of peace. So last week, bureaucrats held a tense standoff with a Doge team that required police intervention. A White House spokesperson says that rogue bureaucrats will not be allowed to hold agencies hostage, and a judge agreed with this. District Judge Beryl Howell denied a request from the agency to grant a temporary restraining order that claimed that Doge committed literal trespass and taking over by force. Now questions are being raised over what USIP could be trying to hide. USIP has around 300 employees, has a budget of $55 million a year. We know that it was established by Congress in 1984, and it claims that its mission is to prevent violent conflicts and broker peace deals abroad. This is, of course, despite the United States having been involved in numerous military interventions, prolonged wars, and the rising global instability in decades since then. It's hard to actually see what USIP has been able to achieve.
Well, it's funny that they only have a budget of $55 million or whatever the exact number is, because if you actually drive by the U.S. Institute for Peace, and I've driven by it any number of times, it's located right on Constitution Avenue. It's literally right off the National Mall. So if you've been a tourist in Washington, D.C., you're driving down Constitution Avenue, you're driving down Main Justice and the Federal Reserve, and then you see this mysterious building, U.S. Institute of Peace. What in the world is this there? And it turns out that this, like so many other alphabet soup agencies or alphabet soup NGOs that are funded by the taxpayer in Washington, D.C., it's just a bunch of deep state career leftist bureaucrats. That's basically all that's going on here, it turns out, at the U.S. Institute of Peace there. By the way, the judge who actually ruled against the USIP employees there and ruled in favor of Elon Musk and Doge, Beryl Howell, total left-wing judge, absolute far-left judge there. I suppose a broken clock, after all, is still correct twice a day there, but it says just how it speaks volumes about how just meritless, frankly, the USIP's lawsuit was against Elon Musk and Doge here for trying to gut out a lot of the fat in this taxpayer subsidized adjunct of the federal government. It's not really an agency. It's not really independent. It's kind of just an appurtenance, you might say, of the federal government. But the federal government, it turns out, has a lot of appurtenances, to use the same word there. That's kind of what Donald Trump was elected to do, by the way. He was elected to drain the swamp. I mean, what did the people out there think that drain the swamp meant? I mean, did y'all think that it was just a bunch of mean tweets? I mean, it's time to actually drain the swamp in action. That's literally the whole point of the Department of Government Efficiency. It's the whole point of what Elon Musk is doing there. Apparently, he's staying awake till 1 a.m. every night. He's sleeping in his office there. The world's wealthiest man is committed to this. He is committed to gutting out waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government. The American people are on his side. American people, roughly 65 to 70% approval ratings, say that they like what Doge and Elon Musk are doing there. It is slush funds. It is taxpayer subsidized career leftist bureaucrat slush funds like the USIP that are on the wrong side of the American voter. And yet again, Gabriella, we see that the left is forced to defend a fairly indefensible position, a position, mind you, that, as I just said, even a very left-wing judge like Beryl Howell actually ruled against.
I want to talk to you about accused pro-Hamas supporter Mahmoud Khalil, who you mentioned earlier. We're learning more about him, this detained Columbia University protester. The New York Post is reporting today that he hid his ties to UNRWA on his visa application. As we know, UNRWA was rightfully stripped of tens of millions of dollars in federal funding after it was revealed that several staff members took part in the October 7 terror attack on Israel. So over the weekend, lawyers for the DOJ lodged new accusations against the anti-Israel campus protest leader in court papers, arguing that they should be grounds for deportation. What's your reaction to this?
Well, if you are lying on a U.S. visa application, period, full stop, end of story, that is sufficient grounds to deport you. Frankly, you actually don't even need that. I mean, that is actually above and beyond what is required under our law in order to deport someone. You know, the Mahmoud Khalil story, I sometimes find myself just kind of pinch myself to make sure that we're actually really debating this. This guy is a genuine apologist for Hamas. This is a guy who has praised armed resistance, aka violent jihad, against the Jewish people, against the Jewish state of Israel there. This is someone who was one of the student leaders of the vandalism, the anarchy at Hamilton Hall at Columbia University last year. He was one of the student negotiators there. This is someone who has been closely involved with CUAD, Columbia University Apartheid Divest, a student organization that literally puts on their social media feed, "We seek to eradicate Western civilization." Well, okay, thanks for telling us there. If you're here in a visa, bye-bye. Look, there is an unbroken string of U.S. immigration law going back since the origins of the republic, going back 250 years, that it is inherent in the principle of national sovereignty that any alien, whether legal or illegal, can be removed at any time for any reason. There is no such thing as quote unquote due process when it comes to aliens. This is a key point, actually. It was Justice Robert Jackson, one of the great 20th century Supreme Court justices, in a 1953 case called Shaughnessy, who famously said that due process does not entail any alien around the world with the right to immigrate here against our will. And then once you are here, you don't have a due process right to be safeguarded from removal against the national will. It's a very fancy way of saying that once you're here, if we, the people who are the sovereign here in the United States, if we don't want you here, you're out. That's basically how it works. So the fact that he's lying on his visa paperwork there is additional grounds under the relevant statute, the Immigration and Nationality Act, to deport him. Frankly, as a matter of constitutional law, you don't even need him there. But again, as we were saying earlier, what does it say about the American left and the corporate media here, the chattering class, the commentary, that they are forced to defend this utter miscreant there? This is not just an 80-20 issue, Gabriella. This is probably closer to a 90-10 or a 95-5 issue. The American people want miscreants like this jihadist thug gone, and God willing, gone he shall be.
Well, we're sadly seeing more anti-Israel protests here in Australia. In Melbourne over the weekend, there were more anti-Israel demonstrations held, and they were as vile as ever. Protesters were caught on camera chanting, "All Zionists are terrorists," as they marched through the city. Just absolutely horrific scenes. Josh, what's your response?
Well, unfortunately, this has been pretty common since October 7th, 2023, and it's probably not going to end any time tomorrow. Look, one of the things, Gabriella, that I call for, I actually have a brand new book on this. You and I discussed this last time, called Israel and Civilization: The Fate of the Jewish Nation and the Destiny of the West. And one of the things that I urge all of Israel's supporters and friends all throughout the world, Jews, Christians, frankly, even pro-Israel Muslims, whatever you are there, you have to make the case for Israel in moralistic argumentation. For far too much of my lifetime, Gabriella, I've seen the nominal pro-Israel side speak in very kind of mundane, really kind of watered down terms. They just say, we just want to exist, or we just want peace, or we just want two states. And then a lot of very young, impressionable people there, frankly, a lot of kind of less religious people who don't otherwise have meaning in their lives and are looking for something to fill that vacuum of meaning there. They're naturally attracted to the quote unquote pro-Palestinian side because they actually present a moral argumentation. Now, it's very immoral, but they at least speak in moral terminology when they speak of things like occupation or things like Nakba, which is their way of referring to Israel's righteous war for independence in 1948 there. They're making morally charged terms. And my call in the book and just in my general commentary for a long time now has been, for the pro-Israel side, you guys have to make morally charged argumentation as well. Talk about going back thousands and thousands of years, how the Jews are actually indigenous to this particular land there. The Jews were in the land of Israel for literally thousands of years before there was a single, before Islam was created as a religion there. More so than that there, just make the straightforward case that whether it's Australia, whether it's the United States, or whether it's any other Western or Western style country there, the West is stronger when there is an emboldened and empowered Israel there that is able, in an unfettered fashion, to take care of its own neighborhood and to secure and patrol it in a way that redounds to Western civilization's interests. There is no compelling national interest whatsoever for a country like the United States or Australia to support a quote-unquote two-state solution, which means carving up a new Muslim terrorist state in the heart of the Middle East. They'll become a new Iranian launching pad for terrorist attacks. There's no national interest in that whatsoever there. So whether it's explaining that in concrete terms, whether it's making an actual moral argument about the inherent beauty, actually, of Zionism, a term that has been so utterly ridiculed in recent years for garbage reasons, it's nothing less than the Jewish people's right to self-determination in their own ancestral homeland. It's a very straightforward, I would argue, beautiful concept. So make these arguments, though. Don't just let these other guys, these thugs, just take over the streets and then get away with their narrative. It's time for the pro-Israel side to step up and start waging their own loud arguments that are not obnoxious, but they have the benefit of being grounded in truth.
Israel's military is expanding its ground operation across the Gaza Strip, and the Defence Ministry says that it has killed Hamas's new Prime Minister in a precise strike. Now, this, of course, comes as talks to stop the fighting and release the hostages completely stalled. At least, Josh, we are seeing Hamas, it's continued to be weakened.
Yeah, the next time Hamas advertised for its prime minister job, they probably should put in the job description, unclear of how long the job duration is, right? I mean, they've cycled through a bunch of these guys ever since October 7th there. Hamas only has itself to blame, Gabriella, yet again, for the fact that its leaders are being killed. Hamas only has itself to blame, period, full stop, end of story, for the entire state of Gaza since October 7th. They were the ones who slaughtered 1,200 Israelis on that day. They were the ones who took hundreds of civilians hostage. Every single innocent person who has died, every single person is solely morally attributable and indeed attributable in the international laws of armed conflict to Hamas there. So they could have easily extended this ceasefire, though. If they had actually just agreed to the terms that Israel and the United States under Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, they had terms that they could have easily agreed to, such very basic things as, I don't know, give back the hostages that you absolute monsters, you human scumbags have been hiding in your terror tunnels, have been tormenting, have been just generally acting against humanity in the most core vicious way for the past year and a half there. Hamas had every opportunity to extend the ceasefire. They have refused to do so, and God willing, they will reap the rewards of it. The key question, Gabrielle, is whether or not Prime Minister Netanyahu and the IDF are actually prepared to finish the job this time. That is really the key question. I don't think that the Israelis have any other choice but to finish the job. They announced at the onset of this war that the eradication of Hamas was a war aim. Anything less than that will therefore be a failed war effort. So I think that they have no choice but to finish this conflict. The good news as an American is that it seems like Donald Trump fully supports that goal as well.
It is. Trump's administration firmly stands with Israel, and we like to see it. But I want to talk about what is going on in the United States, talking about politics. The younger generation is becoming more conservative. We saw in the election last year, it was a political earthquake. It was the young people who went from being the most progressive to the most conservative in really a short period of time. Here's this analysis on a New York Times podcast.
But if you look at this chart among white men who were 75 years old, supported Kamala Harris at a significantly higher rate than white men who are 20 years old.
That's exactly right.
That's a real shift.
It is a real shift. This is the thing I am the most shocked by, I think, in the last 4 years, is that young people have gone from being the most progressive generation since the baby boomers, and maybe in some ways more so, to becoming potentially the most conservative.
So Democrats are getting destroyed now among young voters.
That's right.
Josh, what do you put this down to? Are younger people becoming more conservative, or is it just that the left has just gone far too extreme?
Well, I think that there are two things here. One is that young people in America have grown up in the shadow of a lot of failures, unfortunately. They've grown up in the shadow of multiple failed wars overseas, whether it's Iraq or Afghanistan. They've grown up in the shadow of an ever-escalating and skyrocketing national debt. Perhaps more so than anything else, the people who have just turned 18 here, those who are in the 18-25 demographic, they partially came of age during the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, they came of age at a time when Anthony Fauci and public authorities here were basically telling you to not leave your house for months or years on end there. If, God forbid, you wanted to take your child to the local park, you could get a violation there. How dare you ever consider going out in public if you're not triple masked, and on and on and on there. COVID-19 was one of the most debilitating episodes in all of modern human history, especially here in the United States when it comes to leading to decreased public trust there. So I think part of this just visceral response to lack of trust is being taken out on the Democratic Party, because they are rightly perceived right now in America's two-party system as the party of institutionalism, as the party that controls the institutions here, whether it's academia, whether it's the media, whether it's the public health authorities there. So they're naturally going to the more counter-institutional, counter-establishment party, which at this time is the Republican Party, especially under Donald Trump. I think that's half it there. The other half of it is that Donald Trump as an individual, just as a cultural icon there, is leading a cultural movement. The same way that Barack Obama led a cultural movement back for impressionable teenagers and 20-somethings back in 2008. Back then, the slogan was hope and change. A lot of young people voted for the Obamas. We all remember that poster, the blue and red poster with kind of the faded image of Barack Obama there. Well, MAGA actually in kind of a weird way, actually is the equivalent of that in this particular decade. Donald Trump is absolutely leading a movement. The red MAGA hat is basically the closest successor to that Hope and Change poster back from 2008 there. And the same way that Barack Obama was bigger than politics, but was really able to transcend popular culture, so too is Donald Trump bigger than politics. And he is 100% transcending and permeating himself all throughout American popular culture. Look at this past weekend. He attended the NCAA Wrestling Championship. He got a roaring applause. The wrestler, I believe from Oklahoma State, who won the national championship, went over to Donald Trump, gave him a big bear hug. Wherever he goes, whether he was at the Daytona 500, the first NASCAR race of the year, whether he went to the Army-Navy football game, wherever he goes here in the U.S., he is immediately embraced. He is applauded there. The whole Trump dance become kind of like a cultural icon here in sports, on television. I mean, he's transcended politics, which makes sense because he's been a global figure for the better part of his entire adult life, going back to the New York tabloids in the late 70s, early 80s. So he really has kind of become much, much, much bigger than just president of the United States. He is leading kind of a just broader societal movement. I think that is part of why young people are flocking to him as well.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Love seeing you do the Trump dance just then, Josh, as well. But finally, before I let you go, I didn't think we'd be agreeing with Bernie Sanders today, but he's actually making sense. He was asked about Donald Trump on ABC News and admitted that nobody thinks illegal immigration is a good thing.
Is there anything that you think Trump has done right?
Yeah, I mean, I think cracking down on fentanyl, making sure our borders are stronger. Look, nobody thinks that illegal immigration is appropriate.
Wasn't expecting that, but credit is, where credit is due. He's right.
You know, I think back to the 2016 Democratic presidential primary. So that was really three candidates. It was Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and the former governor of Maryland, Martin O'Malley. So back then, if memory serves, I think it was during this cycle. It was during a presidential primary debate that the topic of open borders came up. And Bernie Sanders dismissed it out of hand. He said, open borders, that's a Koch brothers concept. Because you got to understand, Gabriella, Bernie Sanders came of age at a time when to be on the left was to support a closed border for big labor reasons, for labor union reasons, for the AFL-CIO, for people like that. And Bernie Sanders, I mean, look at the guy. He's been around the block for a long time. This is someone who, at his core, is a socialist. That is what he cares for.
Yes.
He's not necessarily, at his core, a woke neo-Marxist. He's someone who really cares first and foremost about socialist economics there. So, you know, he doesn't support cracking down on illegal immigration for law and order reasons. He doesn't care about it for sovereignty or nationalism reasons or anything like that there. He supports it in theory. I guess in theory, because in practice, I'd have to see what kind of legislation he would actually support, right? But in theory, I guess he's mouthing off rhetorically support for this because these are kind of his old socialist, closed border, you know, hike the wages of the working class talking points going back to the 1960s. I'm not belittling that, by the way. I happen to also agree with trying to spike the wages of the working class there. I support a more restrictionist immigration paradigm as well there. But the goal or the point here is that this is kind of just an out of context moment for Bernie Sanders. It kind of exposes that he is of a fundamentally different generation. He's been replaced in many ways by the young culture warriors, the Ilhan Omars, the AOCs. But frankly, if Democrats actually want to get back to being somewhat relevant on a national level here in the United States, they need to ditch the culture war and get back to their old blue-collar economics. Even if I don't always agree with those economics, at least they're talking about the issues that matter there. Bernie Sanders, in a weird way, as crazy as he is kind of a throwback to that.
Josh Hammer, Senior Editor at Large at Newsweek, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.